Spring sunlight filtered through the windows of Lady Arlington's ballroom, illuminating the dancers who twirled in a kaleidoscope of silks and satins. Against a far wall, Miss Harriet Everly stood straight-backed, her green eyes carefully tracking the movements of her two young charges across the room. "Still playing nursemaid at 22, Miss Everly? One might think you'd prefer dancing to hovering like a mother hen." Harriet turned to find Lady Penelope Winters beside her, her smile as cold as her tone was sweet. "Lady Penelope, how good of you to concern yourself with my preferences," Harriet said, keeping her voice even. "But I assure you, I find great satisfaction in my position." "As a governess? My dear, you were meant for better things. Your father was a gentleman." "My father was a gentleman who left nothing but debts and fond memories," Harriet replied. "I count myself fortunate to have found respectable employment with Lady Blackmore." Lady Penelope's gaze flickered to where Harriet's charges, the twin daughters of the widowed Lady Blackmore, were being instructed in a country dance by their aunt. "Well, at least until she remarries. I hear Baron Ivington has been calling rather frequently of late." Harriet's heart skipped an unwelcome beat at the mention of the Baron. "Lady Blackmore's affairs are not for my speculation." "No, indeed not," Lady Penelope agreed with mock solemnity. "Though I wonder what will become of you when the Baron takes a wife who prefers to select her own governess for his children." The barb struck home, though Harriet kept her face carefully composed. "I'm sure I shall find another position. Now, if you'll excuse me, I see Miss Caroline requires my assistance." As Harriet glided away, she silently acknowledged the truth in Lady Penelope's cruel observation. Governesses were as disposable as last season's fashions. It was folly to become attached to one's charges or one's position. All would end, sooner or later, when circumstances changed. Marriage was a business transaction for people of quality. Harriet had learned that painful lesson watching her own mother fade away after her father's death, leaving them with nothing but crushing debt. Love was a luxury none could afford, security was the only rational goal. Harriet's position with Lady Blackmore provided that security for now. She earned £30 per annum to educate 8-year-old Caroline and Constance, and to provide companionship for their mother. The position afforded her respectability, if not quite acceptance in society. "Miss Everly." The deep voice behind her sent an involuntary shiver down her spine. She turned to face Baron Ivington, tall and forbidding in his immaculate evening clothes. "My lord, I was hoping you might explain why Miss Caroline appears to be hiding beneath the refreshment table." Harriet followed his gaze and indeed caught a glimpse of a pale blue slipper protruding from beneath the white tablecloth. "Oh dear. She finds large gatherings overwhelming at times." "So I've observed," he said dryly. "Perhaps you might coax her out before Lady Arlington notices and suffers an apoplexy." "Of course, my lord. Immediately." As she moved to retrieve her young charge, the Baron's hand briefly touched her elbow, sending a most unwelcome warmth through her body. "Miss Everly, a word when you've settled the child." "As you wish, my lord." She extracted Caroline from her hiding place with minimal fuss, soothing the girl's anxiety with quiet words and a gentle hand on her shoulder. After delivering her to Lady Blackmore, Harriet found the Baron waiting near a set of French doors that opened onto a small terrace. "I appreciate your handling of the situation," he said, his face unreadable in the shadow of a potted palm. "The children are fond of you." "And I of them, my lord." "Indeed." He studied her with those piercing blue eyes that seemed to look straight through her carefully constructed facade. "I wish to speak with you regarding their future." Harriet's pulse quickened. "Their future, my lord?" "Yes. As you may be aware, I have been calling upon Lady Blackmore with some regularity. The children have mentioned it, she replied carefully. I intend to ask for her hand, he said without preamble. Before I do, I want to be certain the children's education will continue without disruption. They've suffered enough upheaval since their father's passing. Harriet swallowed past the sudden tightness in her throat. That is most considerate of you, my lord. It is merely practical. I have 2 children of my own who have been without proper female guidance since their mother's death 3 years ago. My son is nearly 11 now, and my daughter 9. They would benefit from a governess of your capabilities. I see. She hardly dared believe what she was hearing. You wish me to continue as governess to Caroline and Constance, as well as to your own children? Precisely. For children under one roof will require a steady hand. You've proven yourself competent, and the girls trust you. His expression remained impassive, his voice matter-of-fact. You will, of course, receive an increase in salary commensurate with your expanded duties. Relief flooded through her, though she took care not to show it. That is most generous, my lord. It is not generosity, Miss Everly. It is necessity. My children have driven away 3 governesses already. I require someone with fortitude. He glanced toward the ballroom, where Lady Blackmore was now dancing with an elderly gentleman. I should be clear, I am marrying Lady Blackmore because she is gentle, well-bred, and will provide a mother's care to my children. You will never be more than duty, the Baron declared, his voice as cool and unyielding as marble. I expect complete professionalism in our dealings. The children's welfare is my only concern. Of course, my lord. Harriet kept her expression neutral, though something in his tone made her wonder what had happened to make him so certain love had no place in marriage. I have always understood my position. He nodded once, apparently satisfied. Good. Then we understand each other. As he walked away, Harriet forced herself to breathe evenly. This was, after all, exactly the security she had hoped for, a permanent position in a good household, with a generous salary. That the Baron's eyes haunted her dreams and his rare smiles made her heart flutter were irrelevancies, foolish fancies she would do well to forget. Love was not for women like her. It never had been. 2 weeks later, on a crisp spring morning, Harriet found herself jolting along in Baron Ivington's carriage, heading toward his country estate. Seated across from her, Caroline and Constance chatted excitedly about meeting their new step-siblings, while Lady Blackmore, and now Lady Ivington, dozed against her husband's shoulder. The Baron himself stared out the window, his profile sharp against the passing countryside. Harriet found herself studying the lines of tension around his mouth, wondering what thoughts occupied him on this journey to introduce his new wife to his home and children. Ivington Hall proved to be a handsome stone manor house set among rolling hills and ancient oaks just beginning to show their spring foliage. As the carriage rolled to a stop in the circular drive, Harriet noticed 2 small figures standing on the steps beside an older woman in a black dress. "My children," the Baron said, his voice softening almost imperceptibly. "And Mrs. Winters, their nurse." Harriet followed the family out of the carriage, hanging back as introductions were made. The Baron's son, Master Christopher, was a solemn boy with his father's dark hair and penetrating blue eyes. His daughter, Miss Eleanor, was a wisp of a child with a pinched expression and none of the animation of her soon-to-be stepsisters. "And this is Miss Everly," Lady Ivington said with a warm smile, drawing Harriet forward. "She has been the most wonderful governess to my girls, and now she will teach all 4 of you." Christopher eyed Harriet with open suspicion. "We don't need a governess. We have tutors." "For some subjects, yes," the Baron replied, his tone brooking no argument. "But Miss Everly will oversee your general education and deportment." Eleanor said nothing at all, merely stared at her new stepmother with undisguised hostility. Mrs. Winters sniffed audibly. "I've prepared the blue room for her ladyship and the rose room for the young ladies, as instructed." "Thank you, Mrs. Winters," the Baron replied. "And Miss Everly will take the small chamber adjoining the schoolroom in the east wing." "Very good, sir. Though I would have thought the former governess's room in the nursery more appropriate." The Baron's expression hardened. "Miss Everly will have the east wing chamber, as I stated." Something in his tone made Harriet curious, but she knew better than to question her employer's decisions. Instead, she smiled at Christopher and Eleanor. "I look forward to becoming acquainted with you both. Perhaps after you've shown your stepsisters to their room, you might give me a tour of the schoolroom." Christopher shrugged. Eleanor continued her silent glare. "That's an excellent suggestion," Lady Ivington said with forced brightness. "Children, shall we go inside? I'm eager to see my new home." As they moved toward the house, Harriet noticed the Baron watching his children with a mixture of concern and resignation. Something had broken within that family, and she wondered if even Lady Ivington's gentle nature would be enough to mend it. The first weeks at Ivington Hall settled into a routine that was anything but harmonious. While Caroline and Constance explored their new home with enthusiasm, Christopher and Eleanor maintained a frigid distance from their stepmother and stepsisters alike. In the schoolroom, Harriet found Christopher intelligent but disinterested, completing his work with minimal effort before escaping to his riding lessons. Eleanor, however, proved the greater challenge. The girl refused to speak in Harriet's presence, communicating only through nods, shakes of her head, or the occasional scribbled note. "Has she been silent long?" Harriet asked Mrs. Winters one afternoon, having found the nurse arranging flowers in the family sitting room. "Since her mother died," the older woman replied, her tone suggesting this was common knowledge. "The fever took Lady Ivington, the First Lady Ivington, that is, very suddenly. Eleanor was with her at the end. She hasn't spoken a word since that day." "How dreadful," Harriet murmured, her heart aching for the child. "And no physician has been able to help her?" Mrs. Winters snorted. "The Baron consulted every doctor in London. They all said the same thing: she'll speak when she's ready, and not before." She placed a final stem in the arrangement with unnecessary force. "If you ask me, the poor child needs her father's attention more than she needs doctors. But he can barely stand to look at either of the children since their mother died." "Surely that's not true," Harriet protested. "The Baron clearly cares for his children's welfare." "Caring for their welfare and caring for them are different matters entirely, Miss Everly. The master provides for their physical needs admirably, the best tutors, the finest ponies, every material comfort. But as for affection—" Mrs. Winters shook her head. "Well, you've seen how he is. Cold as ice, that one, since we lost the mistress. Married again for duty's sake, nothing more." Harriet thought of the Baron's words at Lady Arlington's ball, "You will never be more than duty." Perhaps he had been speaking as much to himself as to her. The mystery of the Baron's broken family deepened the following day when Harriet discovered Eleanor alone in the schoolroom, tears streaming silently down her face as she clutched a miniature portrait of a beautiful dark-haired woman. "Eleanor," Harriet said gently, kneeling beside the child's chair. "What's the matter, dear?" The girl merely shook her head, clutching the portrait more tightly. "Is that your mother? She was very beautiful." Eleanor nodded, her lips trembling. "You must miss her terribly," Harriet ventured, daring to place a hand on the girl's shoulder. To her surprise, Eleanor didn't pull away. "I lost my mother when I was not much older than you. It leaves a hole in one's heart that nothing seems to fill." Eleanor's eyes widened slightly, and she reached for her slate, writing in a childish hand. "Did you cry?" "Yes, for a very long time," Harriet admitted. "And sometimes I still do, when something reminds me particularly of her." "Father says crying is weakness," Eleanor wrote. "I believe your father says many things to protect himself from his own pain," Harriet said softly, then immediately worried she had overstepped. "But that is not for me to say. What I do know is that tears are sometimes the only way our hearts can speak when words fail us." Eleanor considered this, then wrote, "Do you think Mama knows I miss her?" "I'm certain of it," Harriet said, gently wiping away a tear from the child's cheek. "Just as I'm certain she would want you to be happy again someday." At that moment, the schoolroom door opened and the Baron himself entered, stopping short at the sight of his daughter's tears and the portrait in her hands. His face paled, then hardened. "Eleanor, compose yourself," he said stiffly. "Miss Everly, a word, if you please." Harriet squeezed Eleanor's shoulder reassuringly before following the Baron into the corridor. "My daughter appears distressed," he said, his voice controlled but with an undercurrent of anger. "Might I ask what you've done to upset her?" "I've done nothing of the sort, my lord," Harriet replied, refusing to be cowed by his tone. "I found Eleanor crying. She was looking at her mother's portrait." "Ah." Something flickered in his eyes, pain, quickly masked. "That portrait should be in my study. She must have taken it again." "Again?" "Eleanor has a habit of collecting her mother's possessions. It is not healthy for her to dwell in the past this way." Harriet chose her next words carefully. "With respect, my lord, perhaps she takes these mementos because they're the only connection she has to her mother now." His jaw tightened. "You presume to know what my daughter needs better than I do." "I presume nothing, my lord. But I do know something of losing a mother at a young age." She met his gaze steadily. "Children need to grieve in their own way. Forbidding Eleanor to remember her mother will not help her heal. And allowing her to wallow in misery will," he countered. 3 years, Miss Everly. It has been 3 years, and still she refuses to speak. Still Christopher rebels against every tutor I hire. I am trying to move this family forward, to give them stability and a new mother's care. Moving forward need not mean erasing the past, Harriet said softly. Perhaps acknowledging their loss might help them accept their new circumstances. The Baron stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "You overstep your position, Miss Everly." "Perhaps I do, my lord," she admitted. "But I care for your children's well-being, all 4 of them. That is my duty, after all." Something shifted in his eyes at her choice of words. "Indeed it is," he said finally. "See that Eleanor returns to her lessons. And Miss Everly, yes, my lord. Do not encourage this morbid attachment to the past. My first wife is gone. No amount of portraits or trinkets will bring her back." As he strode away, Harriet couldn't help but think his words were meant as much for himself as for his daughter. The arrival of summer brought lush greenery to the gardens of Ivington Hall, but the atmosphere within its walls remained decidedly chilly. Lady Ivington tried valiantly to win over her stepchildren, arranging family picnics and reading aloud in the evenings, but Christopher's sullen politeness and Eleanor's continued silence created a constant strain. Harriet found herself increasingly caught between duty to her employer and concern for the children in her care. The Baron's approach, essentially pretending his first marriage had never existed, was clearly not working, yet he remained stubbornly committed to it. The situation came to a head one stormy afternoon in late July. Harriet was conducting a history lesson with all 4 children when Christopher suddenly slammed his book closed. "This is pointless," he declared. "Father only married your mother because she's nothing like our real mother. He doesn't love her. He doesn't love anyone. Christopher! Harriet exclaimed. That is unkind and untrue. Is it? The boy challenged, his young face flushed with anger. He forbids us to even speak of Mamma. He locked away all her things. He pretends she never existed. Caroline and Constance stared wide-eyed at their stepbrother's outburst. Eleanor, surprisingly, reached across the table and took his hand. Your father cares for you very much, Harriet said carefully. Sometimes adults manage grief in ways that are difficult for children to understand. He's not grieving, Christopher insisted. He's forgotten her. Just like he wants us to forget her. Eleanor shook her head vigorously, then to everyone's astonishment, whispered, he hasn't forgotten. The sound of her voice, small and rusty from disuse, brought the room to a stunned silence. Eleanor. Harriet breathed. You spoke. The girl nodded, then continued in a halting whisper. Father cries. At night, in his study. I've heard him. Christopher's expression wavered between disbelief and hope. You're making that up. No, Eleanor whispered. He looks at Mamma's portrait when he thinks no one is watching. The one he keeps in his desk drawer. Harriet felt her heart constrict at this revelation. All this time, she had thought the Baron cold and unfeeling, when in fact he had simply buried his grief so deeply that even his children couldn't see it. You see, she said gently to Christopher. Your father hasn't forgotten your mother. He's hurting too, in his own way. The boy's lower lip trembled. Then why won't he talk about her? Why can't we remember her together? Perhaps because it's too painful for him, Harriet suggested. Sometimes people believe that if they don't speak of their grief, it will eventually disappear. Does it? Constance asked innocently. No, dear, Harriet replied. It doesn't. It only grows heavier from being carried alone. What none of them realized was that the Baron himself stood frozen in the doorway, having arrived moments earlier to retrieve a book he'd left in the schoolroom that morning. The sight of his daughter actually speaking, had rendered him momentarily incapable of movement or speech. Is that true, Father? Christopher asked suddenly, having spotted him. Do you still miss Mother? Do you still love her? All eyes turned to the doorway. The Baron's face was ashen, his customary composure nowhere in evidence. For a long moment, he seemed unable to respond. Then, to Harriet's amazement, he crossed to where his children sat and knelt between their chairs, taking one of each of their hands in his. Every day, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I miss her every day. Eleanor's small hand reached up to touch her father's cheek. Me too, she whispered. Something seemed to break in the Baron then. He gathered both his children into his arms, holding them tightly as thunder rumbled outside. Over their heads, his eyes met Harriet's, filled with a bewildering mixture of gratitude and something else she dared not name. Children, he said finally, releasing them but keeping his hands on their shoulders. I believe we all need to have a long talk about your mother. But first, he looked at Eleanor with wondering eyes. You're speaking again. She nodded shyly. Miss Everly said it's all right to be sad sometimes. That mother would want us to be happy again someday. The Baron's gaze returned to Harriet, who felt heat rise in her cheeks at his intensity. Miss Everly is very wise, he said softly. And quite right. Your mother would never have wanted us to stop living because she had to. I see now that in my own grief I've been unfair to you both. Could we visit her grave? Christopher asked hesitantly. We never have, you know. Yes, the Baron agreed, his voice steadier now. Yes, we should. And perhaps we could tell Lady Ivington about her? I think she would like to know what a wonderful mother you had before her." Eleanor nodded solemnly. "I think she would be friends with Lady Ivington. Mother always liked kind people." The Baron smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his severe features. "She did indeed. And she would be very proud of you both." He stood, smoothing his waistcoat with hands that trembled slightly. "Miss Everly, might I ask you to continue the lessons? I believe Lady Ivington and I have some matters to discuss regarding family remembrances." "Of course, my lord," Harriet replied, her own voice not entirely steady. As he left the schoolroom, Harriet felt something shift in the very foundation of Ivington Hall. The Baron's ice had begun to thaw, and with it, the possibility of healing for his broken family emerged like the first green shoots after a long winter. In the weeks that followed, remarkable changes swept through Ivington Hall. Eleanor spoke more each day, her voice growing stronger as she shared memories of her mother with her stepsisters. Christopher's surliness gave way to a cautious optimism as the Baron began to include him in estate matters, taking time to ride with his son each morning. Most surprising was the transformation in the Baron himself. The rigid formality that had characterized his behavior began to soften. He laughed at dinner, joined in the children's games, and treated Lady Ivington with a gentle affection that, while perhaps not passionate love, showed genuine respect and growing fondness. And then there was his changing manner toward Harriet. He sought her counsel regarding the children's education with increasing frequency, listened to her suggestions with genuine interest, and sometimes lingered after these consultations to discuss books they had both read or music they enjoyed. "You have worked a miracle with my family, Miss Everly," he said to her one evening as they stood watching the children perform an impromptu play in the drawing room. "I am deeply in your debt." "I did nothing, my lord," she demurred. "The miracle was within your family all along, waiting to be uncovered." "You uncovered it," he insisted. "You showed me what I was too blind to see, that in trying to protect my children from pain, I was denying them the very memories that sustained them." Lady Ivington approached them then, smiling warmly. "What intense conversation! I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all, my dear," the Baron said. "Miss Everly and I were just discussing the children's remarkable progress." "Indeed," Lady Ivington agreed. "And I must give credit where it is due. Miss Everly has been the catalyst for so much positive change in this household." She patted Harriet's hand affectionately. "I was just telling Lady Carmichael about you in my last letter. Her own governess is retiring, and she inquired whether you might know of someone similarly talented." Harriet's heart sank. "Lady Carmichael is seeking a governess." "Yes, and I confess I immediately thought of you," Lady Ivington continued, oblivious to Harriet's dismay. "It would mean a significant increase in salary, £50 per annum, I believe, and the opportunity to travel to Italy next year. I told her I would speak with you about it." "That is most kind of you to think of me," Harriet managed, aware of the Baron's sudden stillness beside her. "But I am quite content with my position here." "Oh, but you must at least consider it," Lady Ivington insisted. "It's a rare opportunity. Lady Carmichael is prepared to be most generous." "Thank you, but I believe we should let Miss Everly reflect on the offer," the Baron interrupted, his voice suddenly distant. "It would indeed be an excellent opportunity for advancement." Harriet glanced at him, troubled by his tone. "My lord, I have no desire to. You should consider all opportunities that come your way, Miss Everly," he said formally. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I believe I'm needed for the next act of this theatrical endeavor." As he walked away, Harriet felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. After weeks of warming relations, the Baron had suddenly retreated behind his wall of ice once more. The following days brought a return to the stilted formality of their early acquaintance. The Baron no longer sought Harriet's counsel or engaged her in conversation beyond what was strictly necessary for the children's education. When their paths crossed, he was unfailingly polite but distant, his eyes never quite meeting hers. The children noticed the change as well. "Have you and father quarrelled?" Eleanor asked one morning as Harriet helped her practice her penmanship. "Of course not," Harriet assured her. "Why would you think so?" "Because he looks sad when he thinks you can't see him," the girl replied with the simple directness of childhood. "Like before, when he wouldn't talk about mother." Harriet's heart twisted. "I'm sure you're mistaken, dear. Your father has many responsibilities that occupy his thoughts." "He was happier before," Eleanor insisted. "We all were." That evening, unable to sleep, Harriet wandered to the library in search of a book to occupy her restless mind. To her surprise, she found the Baron there, standing by the window with a glass of brandy in his hand, staring out at the moonlit garden. "My lord," she said, startled. "Forgive me, I didn't realize anyone was here." He turned, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "Miss Everly. Could you not sleep?" "No. My thoughts are rather active tonight. As are mine." He gestured to a chair. "Please, don't let me drive you away. The library is large enough for 2 insomniacs." She hesitated, then moved to the shelves, selecting a volume of poetry. "I only came for something to read. I'll return to my room." "Have you given thought to Lady Carmichael's offer?" he asked abruptly. Harriet turned to face him. "There is nothing to consider. I have no desire to leave Ivington Hall." "That would be a mistake," he said, his voice tight. "Lady Carmichael can offer you advantages I cannot: higher wages, travel, connections in society." "I don't want those things." "What do you want, then?" he demanded, setting down his glass with more force than necessary. "To stay here," she replied simply. "With the children." "With—" She stopped herself. "With," he prompted, taking a step toward her. "With the family I have come to care for deeply," she finished. He shook his head. "You deserve better than to spend your life as a governess, Miss Everly. You are too intelligent, too compassionate, too—" He broke off, running a hand through his hair in a rare gesture of agitation. "You should not sacrifice your future out of loyalty to my family." "It is not a sacrifice to stay where one is valued and useful," she argued. "Where one belongs." "And do you believe you belong here? As a governess? Forever in a position between family and servant?" The question struck at the heart of her insecurities. "I know my place, my lord." "Do you?" he asked softly, moving closer until she could see the troubled depths of his eyes. "Because I find I no longer know mine. Since the day you helped my daughter find her voice again, nothing has been as I expected." Harriet's breath caught. "I don't understand." "Don't you?" His voice was barely above a whisper now. "You, who see so clearly into everyone else's heart." "My lord, Charles," he interrupted. "My name is Charles." "I cannot call you that," she protested weakly. "It wouldn't be proper." "No, it wouldn't," he agreed. "Just as it isn't proper that I find myself thinking of you at all hours. That I look for you in every room I enter. That I dread the day you will inevitably leave this household for a better position." Harriet stared at him, scarcely daring to believe what she was hearing. "You told me once that I would never be more than duty," she reminded him, her voice trembling slightly. "I was wrong," he said simply. "About so many things. About what makes a family. About what heals a broken heart. About you." His hand lifted as if to touch her face, then dropped back to his side. "But that changes nothing. You are still the governess, and I am still your employer. It would be unconscionable of me to compromise your position or your reputation. So you've been avoiding me to protect me?" Harriet asked, understanding dawning. "To protect us both," he corrected. "From an impossible situation." "Why impossible?" she challenged, surprising herself with her boldness. "Because society would never accept such a match," he replied. "Because my children need stability, not scandal. Because Lady Ivington deserves better than to be humiliated by her husband's inappropriate feelings for her children's governess." "And what of Lady Ivington's feelings on the matter?" a new voice inquired from the doorway. They turned, mortified, to find Lady Ivington herself standing there, a knowing smile playing about her lips. "Margaret," Charles said, his face pale. "I can explain." "There is no need," she interrupted, coming fully into the room. "Charles, you have been a good husband to me these past months. Kind, respectful, attentive to my comfort. But we both know that our marriage was one of convenience from the beginning. That does not excuse, please." She held up a hand. "Let me finish. When my dear Edward died, I thought I would never know happiness again. He was the love of my life, as Isabella was yours. We married because our children needed parents, and we needed companions in our loneliness." Harriet stood frozen, feeling as though she had stumbled into a scene from a play in which she had no lines. "But something remarkable has happened in this house," Lady Ivington continued. "The children are thriving. You are becoming the man you were before grief hardened your heart. And much of that transformation began with Miss Everly's arrival." She turned to Harriet with a warm smile. "My dear, I've seen how you look at each other when you think no one is watching. I've seen the life return to this house under your gentle guidance." "Lady Ivington," Harriet began, mortified. "I would never." "I know that," Lady Ivington assured her. "You are both far too honorable. Which is why I've made a decision." She took a deep breath. "I am returning to my family home in Bath. My brother has been in poor health, and he needs me. The children will stay here, of course. This is their home now, and they are happy." "Margaret, this is unnecessary," Charles protested. "It is entirely necessary," she contradicted gently. "I married you because I thought it was my duty to provide mothers for your children and fathers for mine. But children need love more than they need duty. You've taught me that, Charles. And so do adults." Harriet found her voice at last. "Lady Ivington, I could never stand between a husband and wife." "You haven't," Lady Ivington assured her. "I've discussed this with my solicitor. There are grounds for annulment, given certain aspects of our marriage. It can be handled quietly, with minimal gossip." Charles stared at his wife in astonishment. "You've planned this? For how long?" "Since I saw the way Eleanor looked at Miss Everly after she spoke for the first time," Lady Ivington replied. "Like she'd found the missing piece of her heart. The same way you looked at her, Charles." Harriet felt tears burning behind her eyes. "I don't know what to say." "Say nothing now," Lady Ivington advised. "This will take time to arrange properly. But know that you have my blessing, both of you." She moved to the door, then paused. "Oh, and I've already written to Lady Carmichael declining her offer on your behalf, Miss Everly. I told her you were indispensable to this family." With a final smile, she left the library as quietly as she had entered it. In the stunned silence that followed, Harriet and Charles stared at each other. "Did that truly just happen?" Harriet whispered. "I believe it did," he replied, looking dazed. Margaret has always been remarkably perceptive and determined once she makes up her mind. But surely you can't allow her to sacrifice her marriage this way. It seems the decision has already been made, he said slowly. Though I confess, I'm not entirely certain what happens now. Harriet smoothed her skirts nervously. Nor am I. This is unprecedented. A smile began to form on Charles's face, transforming it in a way that made Harriet's heart flutter. Indeed it is. But then, you have made a habit of creating unprecedented situations in this household, Miss Everly. Oh? How so? By making a silent child speak again. By teaching a grieving boy to laugh. By showing a broken man that his heart could still feel something beyond duty. He took a step closer. By making me fall in love with you against every dictate of propriety and common sense. Harriet's breath caught. Love? Yes, love, he said simply. A word I thought I had locked away forever after Isabella died. A feeling I was certain I would never experience again. He reached for her hand, holding it gently between both of his. I love you, Harriet Everly. Not for duty, or convenience, or even for what you've done for my children, though that alone would earn my eternal gratitude. I love you for your courage, your compassion, your unfailing ability to see the truth in people's hearts. Tears spilled down Harriet's cheeks. I never thought, never dared hope. Nor did I, he admitted, raising her hand to his lips. But it seems hope found us anyway, thanks to 4 remarkable children and 1 surprisingly insightful wife. Former wife, Harriet corrected, then blushed at her boldness. Charles laughed, a rich, warm sound that seemed to fill every corner of the room. Indeed. Though that particular transformation will take some time and discretion to accomplish. And in the meantime? Harriet asked softly. In the meantime, I believe we have a family to tend to, he replied. Children to raise, wounds to heal, futures to plan. His eyes held a question. If that is what you want. Harriet thought of the lonely girl she had been, convinced that love was a luxury she could never afford. She thought of the children upstairs, each healing in their own way from losses that had once seemed insurmountable. And she thought of this man before her, who had found the courage to open his heart again after believing it forever closed. It is everything I want, she whispered, and in his answering smile, she saw the promise of a future built not on duty, but on love. 6 months later, on a crisp autumn morning, Harriet stood in the small chapel at Ivington Hall, surrounded by 4 beaming children and a small gathering of friends. Lady Margaret Allington, as she now preferred to be called, sat in the front pew beside her brother, looking thoroughly pleased with herself. As Harriet walked toward Charles, who waited for her at the altar with undisguised joy in his eyes, she reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. There had been challenges, of course, raised eyebrows from some quarters of society, delicate legal negotiations, and the careful blending of 2 families into one. But there had also been unexpected joys, Eleanor's first full conversation with her new stepmother about the mother she had lost, Christopher's proud presentation of the family tree he had created, showing both Isabella and Harriet as his mothers, Caroline and Constance's enthusiastic embrace of their new position as Ivington daughters. As she reached Charles's side and placed her hand in his, Harriet knew with absolute certainty that she had found what she never believed possible, not just security or position, but a love that had healed not only his broken children, but her own guarded heart as well. "Are you ready, my love?" Charles murmured. "For everything," Harriet replied, and together they turned to face their future, built not on duty, but on something far more enduring.